Hey guys, it's Cass. I'm going to be doing my November reading wrap up today. I feel like I have not done a good job at introducing myself on this channel yet, so I just wanted to give a quick little hey. I'm a long time quiet observer of BookTube and Bookstagram. I post a little bit about books on my personal Instagram account, but finally decided to make a channel this past month, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. I read mainly literary fiction, essay collections, and memoirs, so if that's your thing, feel free to stick around and chat. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the books that I read in November, so we're gonna get into that. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Damn. So I read 9 books this month, which I'm not sure how that happened. I feel like I was on the brink of a slump earlier in the month, but I managed to get myself out of it. So the first book that I read this month was I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. I rated this 4 stars. This is about a woman in her 20s. She is in a really unhealthy and toxic relationship with a man who is married, and they're both kind of obsessed with this social media influencer that the man used to be in a relationship with. This influencer is like the complete opposite of the narrator as far as her looks, her class, her social status. So there's a lot of tension, and it really shows the kind of dark side of social media and the obsessiveness that can come out of it when you're looking at people that you don't know online. We're inside the narrator's head the entire time as she's scrolling through this woman's social media, texting this man that she's obsessed with. She even goes so far as to try and seek out the woman in person. So she kind of takes it to some really dark extremes. I felt like the book was relatable in some of the less extreme scenarios, but I think that this book does a really good job at kind of exploring the way that systems in society uphold those differences between people. I feel like a lot of books in this sort of genre kind of just look at the way that individuals perpetuate racism and sexism and things like that, but this does a really great job at connecting it to the bigger picture. This really reminded me of one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, Sympathy by Olivia Sujic. And it's funny because she actually is one of the blurbs on here, so it kind of makes sense. But I thought that the way that Patel writes and the voice that she uses is very current and of the times. There's a lot of different kind of formats in here. We see like text messages and stuff that are being exchanged between the woman and the man, and just really detailed descriptions kind of the influencer culture that we see a lot. I feel like you'll read this and you'll kind of be able to exactly picture who she's talking about in this book. So yeah, 4 stars. The second book that I read this month was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. I listened to it as an audiobook on Scribd, which I'm not a huge audiobook person, but this one was pretty short, and I just like listened to it one afternoon while I was on a walk and making dinner, and I really liked it as an audiobook. This is split into 2 parts. It's super short. I think it's just a little bit over 100 pages, but the first part of the book follows in the third person an Israeli soldier who is part of a group that in 1949 raped and murdered a Palestinian woman. And then the second half of the book, the perspective switches to the first person, and it is a modern day Palestinian woman, and she finds out that the crime was committed on her birthday, I think 25 years before she was born to the day. So she kind of becomes obsessed with the crime and finding out the details of it because there's not a lot of information, which kind of goes back to the title, Minor Detail. It was a really minor detail in a much larger conflict in history, but she's really affected by it. So this woman risks her life by traveling to the scene where the crime took place all those years ago, and the ending of this book honestly made my jaw drop. And I think one of the places where Shibli really shined, besides just fitting everything that she did into such a short book, is kind of the way that she played with contrast, with the first part of the book being in the third person, the second part of the book was in the first person. There's kind of an impersonal tone in the first part, kind of shows his emotional distance from the crime that takes place that he's a part of. And then the first person, you know, you're in the modern day Palestinian woman's head. She just had a really relatable voice, and I wish that we had gotten to spend a bit more time on that side of the story and with that character. There's also a lot of like repetition in that first part that kind of just shows the daily ins and outs of the soldier's life, and then in the second part, we get much more varied events, and she travels to a lot of different places in her efforts to get to her destination where the crime took place. I rated this 4 stars. I saw it recommended a lot as a good place to start with Palestinian literature, and I would definitely agree. It doesn't give a ton of historical context, but I think it definitely does kind of do a good job for fiction at depicting the conflict. The next book that I read in November is The Leaving Season by Kelly McMasters. I rated this a 3.75 stars. It wasn't quite like a 3-star for me, but it also wasn't quite a 4-star. So that's why it kind of got that weird quarter rating. This is a memoir in essays, so as soon as I saw that, I was sold. I found out about this from Renee at the Left-Handed Readers channel. I think I put it on hold as soon as I watched her video. So this looks at marriage, motherhood, moving, and one of my favorite essays in the book deals with her owning a bookstore, which I thought was a really interesting experience that I don't see talked about in books that often. This takes us through the beginning of her relationship with an artist in New York. They get married, he deals with some health problems, they have kids, they end up moving to rural Pennsylvania and living in a farmhouse there, and it's kind of a big shock to Kelly's system. She kind of finds a place in the community by opening a bookshop, even though she was kind of skeptical on whether or not it was going to be successful. It ended up doing well, but her marriage ended up falling apart. So the second part of the book takes us through her kind of picking up the pieces from that. Her and her children end up moving. She's looking for, you know, a steady job, and she just kind of rebuilds her life after her divorce. This had, like, on paper, all of the boxes checked for a book that I should have absolutely loved, but I just didn't connect with the writing as much as I wanted to. A lot of the times with books like this, you know, I'm like underlining things, but something about this didn't fully connect with me. I really would have loved to hear more about her experience owning a bookstore. I think that that could have boosted up the rating a little bit for me, just because that's something that, like I said, is so different for this genre. We see a lot of, you know, memoirs and essays about motherhood and marriage and things like that, and I feel like the bookstore aspect was just something a little bit different. It didn't last for a very long time, so maybe she didn't have a ton of material to share for it, but that was kind of my main critique with this. The next book that I read in November was Hot Milk by Deborah Levy. This was my 1 5-star read of the month, and I think I mentioned in a previous video, I think Deborah Levy is becoming one of my absolute favorite authors. Almost everything that I've read from her has just been a hit. So I was super excited to get into this. Like I had mentioned earlier in the video, I was kind of approaching a reading slump, and I just needed something quick that I knew that I would enjoy. You know, I just needed a win, I needed to finish something, so I picked this up, and that was absolutely the correct choice. I think I finished it in like 2 days and just absolutely loved every second of it. It's about a woman in her 20s named Sophia and her mother Rose. Her mom is dealing with kind of a mysterious illness where she can't walk, and so they end up traveling to Spain to get some care from this, he's not exactly a doctor. I think he refers to himself as a consultant. So he's kind of a strange character. We're not really sure if we can trust him or not. And this is just really a look at a mother-daughter relationship. Sophia is her mom's caretaker, so they have a really kind of codependent relationship, and it's not the healthiest. Sophia has given up her thesis and a lot of opportunities in life just to research, causes for her mother's illness, to take care of her just in her day-to-day life. And in the book, we can kind of see her mindset around that start to shift. While they're in Spain, Sophia ends up meeting some people and they kind of change her perspective. She ends up falling in love, and she just really grapples with how to separate her identity as her own person from her identity as her mom's caretaker that she's just kind of settled into for so long. This was another book whose ending had me on the edge of my seat. I was honestly very shocked by some of Sophia's actions towards the end, and I don't know, I just really love Deborah Levy's writing. I feel like she's so clear in what she's trying to say. Her writing isn't overly flowery and complicated, but it's still beautiful. And yeah, this was just a great book if you like a mother-daughter relationship, if you like a woman trying to figure out who she is. I would really recommend this one. I think it's a little bit over 200 pages. It goes really fast, and I thought that it was really good. I know there's a lot of kind of mixed reviews on Goodreads, but I think for the right person, like myself, this could be a 5-star book. The next book that I read in November was The Chandelier by Clarice Lispector. I rated this one 3 stars, and I talked a lot about it in my 24-hour reading challenge because my main goal of that video was to finish this book. So I won't go too in depth here, but this book is Clarice Lispector's second novel, and it's one of her longer ones, which is maybe part of the reason why I struggled with it as much as I did. It's about a girl named Virginia and her brother. They grow up together on a farm. Their life isn't great, and they kind of are always dreaming of being able to move to the city whenever they're older. They finally do, and then her brother ends up getting married and kind of abandoning Virginia. So she's on her own trying to, once again, figure herself out and figure out what she wants to do with her life. I had just super mixed feelings about this. This felt a lot clunkier than the other Lispectors that I've read. I don't know if it's due to the length. I don't know if it's just because it's one of her earlier works. One of the things about Clarice Lispector is that she uses a lot of not typical phrasing and grammar and things like that. Sometimes her language can get very out there while, she's trying to describe love or identity or the passage of time or memory, things like that. She's kind of dealing with some more abstract topics, and I really connect with that in the shorter works of hers that I've read, but this one was not making as much sense to me as those do. I find with the shorter books, she'll kind of go off and do her thing, and then she'll bring it all together, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from, I see what you're saying. And I had a couple of those moments with this book, but they were few and far in between, just because it was, I think, over 300 pages, and usually her books are a fraction of that. So I'm curious to read some more of her earlier works. I have Near to the Wild Heart, which is her first novel, on my shelf, and I just want to see if maybe it's just a matter of me enjoying her older works more. This is one that I think would benefit from a reread, but I'm probably not going to be ready to do that for a little while. Next up is Slouching Towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion. I rated this 4 stars. I think that this is a really good introductory essay collection, whether you're looking to get into essays in general or if you're looking to get into Joan Didion's work. This was her first collection. I feel like it is her most iconic, her most famous. It's split into 3 parts. The first one is mainly about California and the West in the 1960s. The second one is more personal writing, and the third is about places that Joan has traveled to. There are a lot of shorter pieces in this book that really help you to kind of make progress throughout it, but it also is a really good introduction to Joan Didion's style of writing. She has a really distinct style of prose, and I find that where this collection really shines for me is in the way that she evokes a sense of time and place. Whether it's California or New York City, you can just really get the sense of what it was like to be there at the time that she was writing. My favorite essay from the first section was Some Dreamers of the Golden Dream. That is about the trial of Lucille Miller. She was a housewife who lived in San Bernardino with her family and ended up being convicted of murdering her husband. I talked a bit more in depth about that in the 24-hour reading challenge as well. My favorite from the second section was on keeping a notebook, and that talks a lot about writing, which is something that I really enjoy. And she talks a lot about how people keep notebooks to keep in touch with themselves. And there was a quote in that essay that I really enjoyed that I wanted to read. She says, "It all comes back. Perhaps it is difficult to see the value in having oneself back in that kind of mood, but I do see it. I think we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. Otherwise, they turn up unannounced and surprise us, come hammering on the mind's door at 4 a.m. of a bad night and demand to know who deserted them, who betrayed them, who is going to make amends. We forget all too soon the things we thought we could never forget. We forget the loves and the betrayals alike, forget what we whispered and what we screamed, forget who we were. I have already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be." After that, she kind of talks about different versions of her past self that I just thought was super insightful as I am like getting older and just reflecting on my life so far. So I really enjoyed that one. I also really liked in the second section on going home. This talks about her going back to her family's house for her daughter's birthday party and just goes into her family dynamics and how her husband doesn't understand those and just how they change over time and just the different memories that she has of being at home and how that affected her. And then my favorite from the third section was Goodbye to All That, which was about her moving to New York City in her early 20s and the years that she spent there, and then kind of the mental breakdown that she had towards the end of it where she realized that she needed to move back to California. I really loved the more personal aspect of a lot of the essays in here, so that one was a favorite for that too. Next book that I read in November was The Easy Life by Marguerite Duras. I rated this 3.5 stars. It is about a 25-year-old woman named Francine, and she witnesses some family tragedies in the first section of this book. I don't want to get into detail about them because they were honestly really shocking to read, and I feel like if you're gonna read it, it's better to kind of go into it not knowing. She's really detailed, and it really sets the scene for the second part of the book, which sees Francine going to a town on the coast, and she unravels a little bit there, just kind of processing what her and her family went through. Francine is not really sure what direction her life is supposed to take at this point. She's lost people that are really close to her, and she's just trying to find her footing. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it was the way that Duras plays around with language in this second section. She's switching perspectives a lot. She's switching up the way that Francine is referred to, and I think it just does a really good job at showing kind of the multiple different paths that her life could take. I think the translator's note that is in this edition does a really good job at exploring the choices that they made with the language and the way that it represents Francine not recognizing herself and feeling like she hasn't really done anything to shape the direction that her life is going. And the third part is Francine returning home from the seaside, and she's made up her mind about what she wants to do, so we see her go home and enact that decision. It's my first book by Marguerite Duras, and it wasn't a favorite, but I have a couple of her other books on my shelf that I plan on reading at some point. I will return to her work. The next book that I read in November was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is a bit of a different choice for me. I surprised myself with this one, but I was influenced to read it after seeing the new movie with my friends. They've gotten really into it this year, and I wanted to see what the hype was about. I had read at least the first book, this book, back when I was in maybe 6th grade, and I cannot for the life of me remember if I read the other 2 books or if I saw any of the movies, but I do plan on reading the rest of the series, and I do plan on watching the movies whenever my friends are all home for holiday break. One of the things that really struck me while reading this was that I did not remember a single thing from reading this, you know, probably 12 years ago at this point. The only thing that I could really remember was the wilderness of the arena. That had really, those details had really stuck out to me, but the plot points I could not remember, so this was a ride for me. I feel like everyone at this point probably knows what this is about. There's 12 different districts in a dystopian version of North America in the future, and every year 2 tributes, a boy and a girl, are called into the Hunger Games, chosen randomly, and they have to fight to the death. It is the ruling class's entertainment, and also a way for them to remind the districts of the impact of the war that they fought and lost. So it's kind of their way of keeping them in check after the war. And yeah, I read this in like 2 days. It's young adult, so it went by really fast, but I feel like this was a good reminder for me that I can step out of my comfort zone. I can do something with more like fantasy or sci-fi elements, which is usually not my thing, but it can be a good change of pace. I think that this was also one of the things that helped to save me from a reading slump. Shout out to the Josh Hutcherson whistle edits that have invaded my TikTok. It's really something. I gave this 4 stars, by the way. I don't think that I mentioned that. The last book that I read in November that I just finished last night is My Work by Olga Ravn. I rated this 3.75 stars again, and I don't have any notes about this, so I'm curious to see if that helps or hinders me in talking about this book. I don't think that this book is going to be for everybody, but if you are a fan of books about motherhood and kind of maybe the darker side of motherhood, I'm thinking of A Life's Work by Rachel Cusk, Motherhood by Sheila Heti, which I haven't read yet, but sounds like it talks about a lot of the same things as this. If you're into that, I think you'll enjoy this. If you can get past the experimental forms that Olga is using in this book, this blends together fiction, memoir, essay, and a lot of poetry, which the poetry is kind of where this lost points for me. I don't read a lot of poetry, but I respect it. And it just kind of threw me every time that it came up. There would be pretty long sections of just poems, and the way that they read to me almost felt like they could have been put into like normal prose and it would have worked, but they were formatted as a poem. The fiction and like memoir and essay aspects of this I really enjoyed. This book is like honestly kind of scary. It talks a lot about, you know, the changes that someone's body is going through when they're pregnant. One of the sections in here is like a pregnancy journal where she's detailing all of the different changes that are going on. And then there's a lot also about the aftermath of giving birth and just dealing with the day-to-day of taking care of a child, dealing with postpartum depression, and mainly anxiety was what it seemed like was going on in this book. Just all the fear about having a kid, and yeah, it gave me a lot to think about. The other thing that really stood out to me in this was the discussions about class and making money and being able to support a family. Obviously, the book is called My Work, so it talks a lot about the main character trying to accomplish her work of finishing her book. It also talks a lot about the domestic work that she is also juggling, taking care of the kid and the house and everything like that. And I really liked kind of the motif of work throughout it and the different forms that it can take. I feel like that was maybe better without notes. Maybe it's just because I finished it yesterday. That is everything that I read in November. 6 of the 9 books, since the other ones were either digital or audiobook. Thank you for bearing with me as I figure out how to talk about the books that I've read. I'm still trying to find my footing and not describe everything as interesting or that I enjoyed it. But yeah, let me know what your favorite book that you read in November was. Let me know what you're planning on reading in December, and I will see you in the next one.